All right, today we're talking about networking and relationship building and connecting with clients, even if you feel like you don't belong in an industry, how you can connect with some of the most amazing people in your industry, in your field. My guest today is Tim Harrison. I'll tell you more about him in a second, so stay tuned.
Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we feature top entrepreneurs, business leaders, and thought leaders and ask them how they built key relationships to get where they are today. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hey, John Corcoran here. I'm the host of this show, and every week I get to talk to smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs from all kinds of companies. We've had Netflix, Kinko's, Grubhub, Quicken, you name it, YPO, EO. Check out the archives. You can check out all those past episodes. And this episode brought to you by Rise 25, where we help B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. And you can learn about what we do at rise25.com or email us at support@rise25.com. And this episode also brought to you by the Entrepreneurial Master's Program, EMP, which is a 3-year-long, highly selective training program for members of Entrepreneurs Organization. My guest here today and I connected through this program. It's a wonderful program. You learn from thought leaders, experts, and peers on personal and professional growth centered around 5 different pillars. Highly recommend it, and we'll link to it in the show notes so you can learn more about it. And I also want to give a shout out to Cesar Quintero, who is the organizer, facilitator of that program, and also an EOS implementer. And you can learn about him at theprofitrecipe.com. He's based out of Miami Beach, works all over the globe. But my guest here today is Tim Harrison. Now, he's a wealth management advisor with Harrison Financial Services. He's been doing it for about 30 years now, helping people with financial security through solutions for both personal and business needs. He's beginning his career with Northwestern Mutual. Today leads a team of 13 professionals at Harrison Financial Services. And collectively, they have 20 different professional designations and postgraduate degrees. And he is based out of Omaha, Nebraska. And Tim, I want to start with this story of you were 6 years old and you did 2 things that your mother told you not to do. Not to ride your brother's bike and not to ride in the street. And it almost ended disastrously. And we almost wouldn't be having this conversation here today. You end up, a car comes out of nowhere. You go across the windshield. You broke your leg. You broke your head. You're in the hospital for a long period of time. And we were talking before, and you said that gave you the idea that every day is a gift. Reflect back on that for me, what that was like starting out your life at tender age of 6 years old and having that kind of perspective.
Yeah, thanks, John. And I would just say that car accident was a life-changing event, even though at a very young age, it sticks out in my mind. I remember waking up to my father and just saying, "Where am I?" And again, I've only been told the rest of the story, which is coming down the street there and turning behind a truck and a car close by. And so hitting the windshield. And as you said, I broke my collarbones, leg. My head had a lot of stitches in it and still have some things you probably can't see, but nevertheless, at a young age, having been big into sports and a lot of things, it was just a very much impactful, traumatic thing at that time. And I know it was traumatic for my mother because unfortunately she was at the kitchen sink and kind of saw what happened. And it was, not good. But obviously I'm here and survived that. And I know that every day I feel like is truly a gift. It's like I'm on borrowed time. And so since a young age, I had a greater appreciation for what we can do every day and the impact we can make.
I'm always interested in how those types of pivotal life events shape someone and carve who they become eventually. And you also, you grew up in a lower middle class family in Omaha, Nebraska, and you ended up kind of having good work ethic. You worked a paper route from age 8 to 16. You did snow removal. Talk a little bit about some of the little side hustles you had as a kid.
Yeah, my older brother had a paper route, and even though I think you had to be a certain age to have a route, he had 3 of them, and fortunately, he was able to give me one at 8 years old, and then I took over the next couple of years. I would just credit certainly mom, dad, and watching them growing up, working very hard, and always instilled in us how important that was. So I, at a young age, was doing whatever I could to earn a few dollars and I think I shared with you, started investing at a very young age as well, which certainly had a lot of input into what I eventually ended up going into. My dad, who was with Transamerica at the time, said, why don't you start putting some of that in a mutual fund? And so, yeah, I would say it's hugely impactful in what I ended up doing.
And so your father guides you to put money into this, into a mutual fund. That's pretty rare for an 8-year-old to be putting money into a mutual fund.
Yeah, I think it can be. And in the 90s, everything was going up, which turned out to be. So I have a journal I've kept since a very young age, and I was tracking what that thing was becoming, and definitely had something to do with the planning part of what I do today. And fortunately, I've now passed that on to where my son and daughter, more so my son, just, you can't have them all, but, regularly gives me cash that he's saving from working. Yeah, so yes, we passed that along.
And do you have that journal with you? Is it sitting next to you?
I do.
Right
I
now?
have a number of them, and I keep them all. Yes.
You do. You do.
Yes.
Can you hold one of them up? Do you have one
Yeah,
nearby?
I have one right here. In fact,
Look at
this is
that.
the most recent. I still
That's
keep
so cool.
one. I don't keep it as often as I used to, but I still do keep it. Just try to capture some of the major moments and things that are going on. And I've just always been a planner. I used to track the fish we caught, and I tracked the day, the weather, the type of lure, how long the fish was. That's the kind of thing I do.
And so I got young kids, and I'd love to teach them about investing. Where should they get started if they were to do something like that? I hand them a journal. What should they write down?
Yeah, I'll give you one idea. I don't know about you, but I'll use my daughter as an example. She would regularly come, and still does today, even though she's in college, and ask for money for this or that. She wants this and that. I would always say, well, I'll tell you what, I'll make you a deal. I want you to read this book. We'll discuss after you reach, it could be sometimes it's each chapter, sometimes it's after several chapters. We have to sit down and have a discussion about it. You have to share a little bit of what you've learned, the moral of the story. And at the end of the chapter and at the end of the book, you do a little book report. So we've done that through quite a few books. And actually, one of the podcasts that you may be familiar with, I had her actually, and my son do that as well, where they've tracked entrepreneurial stories and different things through time, and they've had to do reports on that. So that may be an idea for listeners out there. That's been awesome because I have these reports. It's pretty amazing through time how good they get at doing that. And they'll come to me now and say, well, what if I do this? And what if I do this? So,
I'm not beyond paying people to listen to podcasts, so I will pay my kids. That sounds like a good idea.
Absolutely. It's better than a pure bribe, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So you end up, it's no wonder, you were 8 years old, you start working, and you work straight through 16, you go to college, and you actually end up hiring your first assistant at 18, 19 years old. You're already hiring an assistant while you're still in college?
Yeah. So my dad I went to him one day. I said, I'd like to come work with you. Long story short, he said, well, I don't really have a place for you. He suggested I look at Northwestern Mutual. He knew they had an internship where you could essentially work for yourself. So I did. I went through the full-time training class. I was a freshman in college. Again, I thought I honestly would get a business card or a resume that eventually I would go do something else. I certainly didn't want to sell insurance, and I got my securities license pretty early as well, and just started developing a business from scratch. Found I really did like it, really did find a lot of interest in it, and then kind of went down that path, basically.
So you're at 18 years old, you're getting clients and you're investing your clients' money.
Yeah. And I started to mainly work on the insurance side initially. I got the securities license and started doing mutual funds at a pretty young age as well. And then that was going well enough. And what we learned, and my dad always said that Northwestern has the best training, is that I knew what my per hour was worth. I figured out it was definitely worth more after, say, the first 6 months or so than what I could pay somebody. So I hired my first assistant, a woman who could help come in and just do some of my basic paperwork and just do a lot of things that I knew was at the time $8 to $9 an hour work, and I could make $20 an hour. And so I've continued to do that through time. And then my next employee, as I mentioned to you, is my younger brother, who was 16 at the time, and he came to work with me doing some of the planning analysis. And soon after, hired my dad, which he was in the industry, but no longer working with end clients. And at 62, he retired from where he was and came to work with me.
So you had a business that was successful enough at that age that he could go and work for you and earn actually a higher income than he'd made in his entire career. What was that moment like for you as a son, for him as a father, when he came to work for you?
It was weird. I'll say
I was
this.
I was probably going to
weird.
guess that
It
would
was
be the
all-
word you'd use, but I'll let you describe it.
It is the word. It was cool though, very cool. And the coolest thing about it is that my dad was such a humble person that he could do that, because honestly, I don't know if I could do what
Yeah.
he did and when he did
Yeah.
it. And it's just so cool that he saw in me and believed in me enough to leave where he was. I mean, because he was still going to work for a while, and I was able to fortunately pay him a little more than what he was making. And by the way, I mean, I'll just share. So the year before that, I made slightly more than I was about to pay him for an annual salary. But I thought, and it was as you know, you take a risk. I thought that if he would come in and run the inside office, and I could go out and work with clients directly more of the time and not be doing any of the inside stuff, and he could kind of take care of that.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't call him my COO, but he was kind of like it at that time. I thought that might work. And fortunately, and I knew that if it didn't, that my mom, my dad, we were kind of all out of a job at that point. So anyway, fortunately
it worked out okay.
and it worked really well. It
Yeah.
multiplied the next year and kept moving from there. So
I've interviewed a lot of people that have worked with family members, some of whom have been fired by parents. I'm not sure that I've ever interviewed anyone that has hired a parent and had any awkwardness. But was there ever any awkwardness? Like, like he asked for a raise, you couldn't give him one or anything like that?
well, I'll go the other way. So it was really cool overall. It definitely got more complicated as he got to be older. I mean, he worked with me from 62 to 72. And toward the end, I'll just say it got harder, just to get into a point where I knew that we were going to have to kind of move on beyond that.
Right.
Probably the most unusual time was actually the other way around, where there was a year where I had a really there was a short window actually of about 2 months where I had to ask my dad for a couple $1,000s to meet payroll.
Oof.
He lent me the money. He was on my payroll, but he lent me the money. Fortunately, that was a very short stint, and then I was back on a good track. But that did happen once, and he reminds
That's
me
hard.
of that. Well, he used to remind me that he's passed now, but nevertheless, it was.
That's hard. That's hard to have that conversation. You must have figured out at some point you were good at sales. So at what point did you figure out that you have a knack for that?
Actually, I would tell you, I really never thought I was great at sales. I do think I'm really good at connecting people. And although some people think of that as the same, my best friend when I was getting into the business told me he didn't see me doing this. I still view myself as an educator, not so much a salesperson, even though some might disagree. So I
Yeah.
still don't see myself actually as a salesperson, as odd as that might sound.
Consultative sales, I guess, is what some people call it. Right. Right.
Yeah, I think I listen well to what people are trying to do, and I believe I can then help them accomplish that.
You ended up meeting with the CFO of Conagra, which is a Fortune 500 company at the time, who ended up being a great connection for you. How did you meet that person?
Yeah, there's a number of funny stories, but I would say this. So in my sophomore year, it was going pretty well as an intern. I was pretty much working full time while studying accounting, and I ended up passing the CPA exam and finishing my degree. But at the time, I just was kind of working hard. But I met the controller of Conagra at the time, and I remember walking into his office. And this is a C-level executive, and I had no business being there likely, and he had a pillow on the floor and a sign on his desk. And he said, the sign said, "Neil here." And he said, so I came in, I was like, oh boy, this will be interesting. Sat down, and he said, "You're nickel." And I figured out that meant I should start talking. And anyway, he became a client. Then he referred me to the CFO. CFO became a great client. It took a few meetings, though, to kind of talk to him about what we did that was unique. He liked our planning approach. And long story short, he became a real advocate for me. And I think he just saw a little bit of maybe himself in me at a younger age and was willing to walk me around to some of the offices, introduce me to some other key executives. We were doing some things from a planning perspective that were fairly unique at the time. So
like what? What were you doing that was different?
The biggest thing was I became really fluent in all of the benefits for the executives there. So the controller, I basically asked him for his benefits booklets, and at the time it wasn't all electronic yet. But I studied these things. I mean, just like I studied accounting, I would study the benefits booklets. I'd be able to tell them what their long-term incentive plan, what their CRISP plan was, what their non-qualified stock option plan was. there was I was again in accounting, so I learned about some of the tax rules and treatment around what happened if you died, and let's say you had stock options and you passed away, like what happens, what's the tax treatment? And then what liquidity needs do you have for both estate planning and income tax planning at that time? So I just learned some things that were at least unique to most, even today. I mean, I talked to advisors around the country who still don't really know what I knew when I was in college about helping these executives from a tax standpoint.
So because you studied the benefits for Conagra so well, that naturally led to then you being introduced to other C-suite executives around the country around Conagra. And you could kind of go deep with this one company. And you end up doing the same thing with Deloitte. You end up meeting the managing partner of Deloitte, who referred you around to a bunch of other managing partners of Deloitte as well.
Well, and it was so linked because once I learned what to do in that company, then we had Union Pacific in Omaha. We had five Fortune 500 companies in Omaha at the time, which at least for our size city is a lot per capita. And so once you learn one, you could do the same thing in another company. And so there was then a group of us that all started to focus in this particular area. And so I just started to nest in, Conagra, Union Pacific, can name the companies. Deloitte was one of them. Deloitte, the law firms that serve these companies like Conagra and Union Pacific. So it was a very easy way to kind of continue to nest around to others.
Now, another strategy you employed was, I love this. You spent a couple of winters in Miami Beach and LA, which sounds wonderful if you're living in Omaha and you're a young single guy and you want to go travel. And you end up networking with, people like the COO of Carnival Cruise Lines. I have to ask, if you reflect back on it, you're a young guy still establishing your career. Some people would never have the confidence to have a conversation with people that are at that stature in their career, much less get hired by them, serve them. Was there something in you that prepared you for that? Or why do you think you managed to do it well when others would struggle with it?
No, it's a great question. I would love to tell you I have that all figured out. I just would say I had some early success that really fueled me. And I look back and I could say, well, I'm doing something. And I don't know that I ever had that much success growing up. I was good at a few sports, but honestly, this was the most successful I'd ever been at anything. So for me, that fueled me in and of itself to say, listen, I really have something here. It's something unique that apparently others don't see or don't have. And so I did have a really good mentor also in college that did work in that executive marketplace, and I was able to learn from him. So I didn't talk about that yet, but that was helpful.
Who is that? Who is that mentor?
His name is Byron McFarland. Still at the tail end of his career now, but really, really good in that executive space. And so met him about a year into the business. He asked me to go down the hall. I got a note in my mailbox, and I thought I was in trouble. He was the big guy in the corner office. And long story short, he said, "You have wisdom." I have wisdom, he said, "and you have energy." He asked me to see my calendar, and I showed him how busy it was. And he said, let's try to team up. And so for a couple of years, at least, he worked closely with me. And
he was at Northwestern Mutual also?
Yeah, he was.
Okay.
He was the leading guy at Northwestern at the time.
So he saw kind of some potential in you, and he had more years of experience. And so it's kind of mutually beneficial relationship.
Yeah. And then to your question earlier, same thing happened with the CFO of Deloitte. The CFO of Conagra. That led me to working with a Deloitte partner who was the managing partner in Omaha of several of Fortune 500 companies. He became an advocate and a client that led me to. So a lot of these mentors really helped me just connect to other dots that I probably had no business really connecting to, but they found I was doing some things that were unique.
Now, with some people, the struggle is, it's not just meeting people originally, but it's how to keep in touch, maintain relationship with people without feeling naggy or anything like that. These days, a lot of people do that with content marketing or with social media, but, we're talking about a time period before both of those. What did you do in order to, keep top of mind, maintain in touch with people that you met around the country or different executives that you met, especially if they didn't become a client right away? How did you keep in touch with them?
Yeah, something you could even look up. There's something called the one card system. And there's a guy named Al Granum who essentially invented this system within the insurance industry in Chicago, many years ago. But if you look it up, I think this book has been like translated in 27 languages or something like that. But nevertheless, if you look it up, Al did like I said, of 20 plus year studies of how to follow up and build a financial services practice. So I'm going to give credit to what I learned through Al Graham. So to this day, John, what's interesting is I keep, and I could show you this too, a manual, what used to be called a blue book, that every single day of activity for my 30 years in my career, I can tell you who I saw, any case opens, any referrals I got from that person, whatever social I did that day, maybe a lunch meeting or a coffee meeting. I still keep it, and I still have it to this day.
On paper, not on software anymore, not on your phone.
They have software. I did that for a few years, and I realized, you know what, I get a lot more out of the actual cathartic exercise of actually writing it down. And I have my team members, my other advisors on my team. We have 23 of us, and but the advisors at least all track it the same way.
Really? Wow, that's funny. I mean, that there's something to be said for that, just that consistency, right? Just doing it.
It's worked. And that's the short of it, is I think it is that consistency. So what people say to me often is that Tim he follows the system. He follows the plan. He does what he learned. And I mean, it's about that simple. Honestly.
Now, another thing you discovered was city clubs. Well, talk about what city clubs were and specifically where you should go sit to eat at city clubs.
Yeah, well, so you mentioned that I spent a couple winters, and what happened is when working with some of the Deloitte partners and some of the Conagra, I actually had another executive office out in LA, and I was single and young and doing well, reasonably well. And I happened to be going and speaking at some cities to teach some other younger people what I was doing. And basically I had an opportunity to go out and join a city club in Los Angeles. When I went out there for a winter, I found out a little bit more about it. Usually these city clubs were something you could join socially, and usually they're located on the top floor or two of some of the better buildings in town. So I first joined it in the city club in LA. But what I found is when I travel to Chicago or I'd go to New York or any major city, most of them have a city club, and they have reciprocal arrangements just like any country club would. And so when I ended up the third winter going down and spending time in Miami Beach, and I could tell you that story, but nevertheless, they had in their city club what they call the captain's table, which is a table that sat 16 people. And I would go there every day because in Miami Beach in particular, I didn't have as many natural connections when I went down there. And again, separate story as to how I ended up down there. But so I just was like, well, maybe that's one way every day to go to lunch there. You could just sit at that table and meet other people who perhaps did not also have somebody with them. And what I found is there was a lot of, senators or former managing partners. There's just some really important people who would sit at this table every day. And then there's this young kid really who would sit there and lo and behold, they'd start asking me questions, and they wondered, who's this kid who's willing to sit at this table, the big boys table. And it was a great way for me to meet people. So it was one thing I chose to do that worked out really well.
That's a great strategy. All right. Take me to 2007. You had one of your best years ever. Of course, that was the year of the financial crisis, kind of economic collapse, housing crisis. And you, like many people, just bought a new house. You also had a lake house, and that was the first big rough patch for you. Take us back to that time.
Yeah. So I bought a lake house at a reasonably young age. It was actually right before I moved out to LA for the winter. And that was kind of my dream home at the time, being young and single and having, a boat and doing a lot of fun things. But got to a point where that had kind of run its course a little bit. I got married. I actually met my wife at that lake house. We had one young child on the way. We knew we needed to move off the lake. We were right on the lake and just concerned about a young child,
running into the lake.
Long story short, this house I am currently in, always had looked at it from the golf course view and was like, someday I didn't even know that I could ever own a house like this, to be honest, but someday if, and lo and behold, it became available around 2006 timeframe. And my wife went and looked at it, even though I said, I think that's well out of our range. Long story short, ended up being able to buy it. The guy was in a divorce situation. I offered him well under what it was listed at. And a year later, we finally got it for what he said I was trying to steal it for, but he had to sell it. So
So you were
So here we
patient.
are.
You didn't come up on your
I
price.
never
You
came
held
up.
on.
He came way down from where it originally was, but he kind of
Mm.
had to sell it. And for whatever reason, nobody else bought it. But around that time, market, I just could not envision it when I bought it, that the market was going to go to Dow 6,500. I just didn't think something like that would actually happen. And our income is very highly correlated to the market based on our investment management business. And
What was it? What did it top out at prior to that?
I should know that number. I don't have it off the top, but I can just say it was less. It was down 47%. So
Down 47%. So probably
high to low,
13,000 or
peak to
something like
trough.
that. Yeah.
So that was
And
painful. And at the
yeah,
time, having a young baby, and then you know, fairly newly married, and then having a lake house, but not having sold it yet, and moving
yeah,
into this dream house. But even though it was a great buy, it was still a lot for me. It was a stretch, and the market doing what it did, and you know what happened in the financial crisis aftermath. I will say, there again, not unlike maybe the first time I ever made a huge risk was hiring my dad at the time, financially at least. And then the next was probably in that 2008-9 timeframe. Even though it was hard, I ended up kind of doubling down on my team, hiring some really key people at the time. Uh, could have really gone bad, but fortunately went really well because I think the clients appreciated the fact we were investing in them at a time that was really difficult to
yeah.
do so. And fortunately, it turned out. I did not know at the time how quickly the market would turn, and I don't think anybody did.
Is it hard when you're holding yourself out as an expert in some area, in your case, financial advice, and yet you're struggling in that same area to advise others? And this happens frequently where, people, they're an expert in something, but they struggle with it as
Yeah,
well, or they go through a period where they struggle with it. It could be fitness, it could be diet, it could be
right.
finances or anything like that. Did that occur to you during that time period?
Yeah, I'll maybe go to one other story there. Kind of reminds me of that, maybe tells the story of that, which is in 2000. Basically Y2K. I just had a really good year, and I was literally sitting at a big conference that we do for the top, investment leaders in this company, and I was sitting in the hot tub with some peers of mine and smoking a cigar and having a great time and thinking we were great. My dad had called me because again he worked for me at the time. It said I had a margin call. And this is, again, kind of Y2K era. I had level 3 communication. I had these various individual equities that I owned. And I thought I thought I knew what I was doing at the time, but it was early in my investment career. Long
And for
story
those who
short,
don't know what a margin call is, tell us what it is.
yeah, exactly. Long story short, when you borrow money and then your equity value goes down and your money you owe is still this amount and it maybe goes underwater, you have to make up the extra difference to get yourself back to where you can pay off your loans.
Yeah.
And there's a certain percentage that you have to have. And long story short, I didn't have enough money in there. So that day, I had like $7,000 margin call. The next day, I had another like $8,000 margin call. And it proceeded and got worse there for a short period of time. So I went from having, at the time, hundreds of thousands of dollars of my own money in individual equities that I thought were doing really well to really financially having a rough go. My answer to your question is, that was not a great example of me being a great investment manager, but what it taught me is the lessons of what not to do. And so that was when I decided I'm going to go out and really educate myself. And you mentioned earlier, I mean, I have 10 different designations, from certified investment management analyst from Wharton or certified private wealth advisor from University of Chicago. And I've done a lot of things since then to actually know what I'm doing, where at the time I thought I did, but I really didn't. And today kind of reminds me of a time like that where people think throwing a dart, you can do okay. And there are times there that's true, but then you kind of really learn sometimes when you really do or don't know your subject matter.
Yeah. And then, in terms of adoption of new technology, we're recording this in September of 2023. AI has been a popular topic now. The industry for you that you are in, investment management, has changed dramatically over the last 30 years.
Yeah.
What is your eye on? Is it AI? Is it other things? What direction do you think this industry is going to go in?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I say AI is just an example where you look at specific companies that are really breaking out substantially, where you've seen results where you've almost never seen the kinds of substantial numbers that are well above expectation, essentially. So again, without naming kind of individual names, I'll just say if you look out there in the landscape of technology and some of the things that are happening with whether it's semiconductors or all across the technology space. And it's totally different than back in Y2K, where a lot of these companies didn't have strong earnings. I mean, now you've got really significant earnings, substantial capital. So, I mean, the short answer to your question is yes, it's changed dramatically what we're interested in today and how and comparative even to, like, say, international markets. And even though I kind of learned growing up, if you will, in this business, that having lower correlations by owning international and certain areas of the market might be good. I mean, there are things today with the war in Ukraine and Russia and some of the, I'll say, challenges that China is having and the deglobalization of kind of everything. There's just a lot of headwinds there that are changing the landscape of what may make sense today from a risk and reward perspective compared to what I learned, say, 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And I think technology is a huge part of that. If you look at the top 10 holdings within the S&P today in the US versus, say, the top 10 holdings in UK, for example, or Europe, they're pretty substantially different as far as, I'll say, the companies that are cyclical, and I'm going to call it maybe more old-fashioned industries that are not dying, but maybe struggling comparative to, say, again, technology and some of these firms that are well-capitalized that are growing significantly faster and better businesses. So
yeah. And I guess
the question, but
I mean, it gets back to what you said a second ago, educating yourself. And behind you in the video, I see stacks of books, and you and I met at a program at MIT that is ongoing. We're going to be back again next year. I think, right, you probably agree that the answer to all these things is continue to educate yourself so that you're prepared for changes in the market that happen.
Absolutely. And I fortunately have done a really good job of surrounding myself with really smart people. I mean, I think I've learned some things, but if anything, I've learned enough to know what I don't know and surround myself with people who do know.
What are a couple books that you would recommend that are maybe stacked behind you, or that you recommend to everyone those who are thinking about investment?
Well, investment specific. I mean, one thing that may be, depending upon the level, but here's what I would say. So during the pandemic, for example, I sent out a book to a bunch of clients and friends. Simple Wealth, Inevitable Wealth is a book by Nick Murray. A fantastic book. And the thing about it, not unlike Warren Buffett, Nick Murray, who's a 50+ year industry veteran in our business, puts things in really simple terms that sometimes can be fairly complicated. And I think it's been just a game changer for a lot of people who have read it. And I think it's pretty influential. So that'd be one, Simple Wealth, Inevitable Wealth by Nick Murray. I mean, I will say, I know within EO, Traction is obviously a very significant book that has changed as a business owner. To me, it's been a game changer. And I know it's not new today, but to me, it is a very influential book for any business owner who's scaling up a business. So whether it be Traction, Scaling Up is another one that Vern Harnish wrote that I also think is fantastic. So I think a combination of those for any business owner who's scaling up is fantastic.
We're almost out of time, so I'm almost about to wrap up. But sure. You mentioned Buffett, Warren Buffett, of course, the Oracle of Omaha. Right. And I live here in San Francisco, and no matter where you live, there are certain personalities that sometimes cast a shadow over the entire region, and I'm sure that must be the case with Warren Buffett. Tell me a little bit about, if at all, one, is there any sort of impact that he's had on your career or your perspective growing up in Omaha, being in an industry related to the work that he does?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really hard to avoid here in town, but I would just say I've gone to many of the shareholder meetings, and I actually bring my kids and my son mainly that will come along with me each year. And then EO, we actually host an event often annually around the Berkshire event. So I would just say, to me, Warren is one of those people where he's obviously been extremely successful, but very humble. Again, one of those people who can take something extremely complex, make it very simple. I mean, in his 90s, he's sitting up there eating See's candy, drinking a Coca-Cola, and can sit there all day long taking questions on any topic and can pretty much break it down to a simple explanation that people can understand. And that's Charlie Munger's same thing. I cannot really describe how unique that is comparative to anybody I know. Wish I was in half that shape when I'm 90 or 100 years old.
I know. Amazing,
yes,
right?
I mean, I think he's definitely been pretty influential. Yeah.
Eat more C's, drink more Coke, apparently, is the lesson behind
That's
that.
pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. So
I want to wrap up with my gratitude question. So I'm a big fan of gratitude, especially expressing gratitude to those who've helped you along the way. In addition to family, friends, I love to hear stories around peers, contemporaries, mentors who you would acknowledge for helping you in your journey.
yeah, I mean, there are so many. I mean, I mentioned Byron, I mentioned my dad. Both again had huge impacts. I told you earlier about a gentleman who was the COO of Carnival Cruise Lines, and he was on the Orange Bowl committee. Again, ran a very successful company. When I was down in Miami, I actually, it's kind of a funny story, although I'm a little embarrassed by it, but I'll say it anyway. So I asked my dad, who worked for me at the time, to FedEx Ken dolls and rip the arm and the leg off. I think I heard this somewhere and I borrowed the idea. So we FedEx these and peanut M&Ms to all the CEOs in Miami area, because I didn't really know many people there, saying I'd give an arm or a leg to meet with you, or I'm going nuts to try to get on your calendar. Well, Bob was like the only one that actually, his assistant called me back. Bob at the time was the COO of this company, and called me back, and she said, Bob would like to see you. And I mean, this is a hugely successful guy. I'm a young 20 something. And anyway, fortunately, I had a reference list that I forwarded to him, and it was very impressive at the time, I guess. And he was willing to sit down, and that he led me to quite a few connections that I wouldn't have otherwise had. And it just gives you a boost of confidence that you can do that with anyone, and hopefully go out and talk to whoever you choose to. And that's a cool thing at a young age. So,
and that one connection probably paid for the entire campaign, sending out all those
by
the
far.
Ken dolls.
I mean, again, it's a little embarrassing I did it, but I did, and it worked with one
Somewhere
guy.
in your garage, you've got a bunch of Ken arms and legs that you don't know what to do with, I imagine.
My dad really, he laughed about that one for a while, but I don't know. I tried, whatever I could try that could work, that was compliant.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love that. Tim, this has been great. Where can people go to connect with you and learn more about you, and maybe reach out and ask you a question?
Sure. Yeah, you can certainly just look up harrisonfinancialservices.com. That's our website and all about us. So that's probably the easiest way, harrisonfinancialservices.com. And
HARRISON financialservices.com. Excellent. All right, Tim. Tim, thanks so much. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.